Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the drafty stone halls of a medieval monastery, where ink-stained fingers, cold porridge, and celestial confusion all mix together in the quietest of cosmic dramas. Picture this, a lone monk, hunched over parchment, tracking the moon's every move like it owes him rent. Somewhere between sacred duty and mild obsession, he keeps a moon log. The only problem? He keeps losing track of it. Not the log. The actual moon. You probably won't survive this schedule, by the way. He wakes up before dawn, chants at least 5 times a day, survives on boiled cabbage, and somehow still finds time to argue with clouds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is by your local stars. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself at the bottom of a steep, winding staircase in a chilly stone tower. The walls smell faintly of old wax and elderberry jam. Brother Ulfric, our moon-misplacing monk, is already halfway up, lantern swinging in one hand, a quill tucked behind his ear, and an expression of deep lunar suspicion on his face. At the top of the tower, a small round room waits. Not quite an observatory, unless you're being generous. There's a creaky wooden stool, a lopsided table covered in scrawled vellum, and a cracked clay mug labeled, "Do not touch, moon dust, or cumin." Ulfric sighs, adjusts his robes, and peers out the tiny window. The moon should be there. It was supposed to be a waxing gibbous. Last night it was a fat half-circle. Tonight? Nothing. Just clouds. Or maybe it ducked behind the hills again. The moon is tricky like that. One mainstream historical fact: medieval monastic life often involved keeping calendars, not just for holy days, but to determine feast fasts, festivals, and full moons. These were crucial for religious observances and agricultural rhythms. But most monks weren't trained astronomers. Their moon-watching often combined scripture, hearsay, and educated guesses. Ulfric is absolutely guessing. But he's doing it with style. He opens his logbook. Today's entry reads: Moon, missing again. Suspect east wind and Brother Arnulf snoring. There's an ink sketch beside it, a sad moon with a tiny suitcase. You squint at the pages. They're riddled with marginal notes, saw glimmer. Maybe reflection off Brother Gregor's bald head. And, if moon continues vanishing, petition Pope to move Easter. It's a mess. But an oddly committed mess. Here's a fringe tidbit: some monks genuinely believed the moon could vanish for spiritual reasons. They wrote about sin darkening the heavens or saints taking the moon away to punish communities. Others thought it was hiding. One manuscript even theorizes the moon could grow weary of watching mankind eat lentils. Historians still argue whether these accounts were symbolic, metaphorical, or the result of sheer boredom after years of night duty. But Ulfric? He takes it very literally. The moon has duties. It should show up on time. He walks over to a little wooden box marked, "Emergency Moon Tools." Inside, a cracked magnifying lens, 3 buttons, a seashell, and a bent spoon. He stares into the spoon's reflection. No moon. You follow him to the ledge, where he stares at the sky as if willing it to cooperate. It doesn't. He sighs deeply. 3rd time this week. It's clearly personal now. Suddenly, a breeze kicks up. A faint glimmer on the far side of the hills. Ulfric perks up. There. A sliver. He scribbles it down in his log. Moon, found. Possibly hiding behind hillock. Must inquire if hillock has motive. The rest of the monastery is asleep now. You can hear soft snores and the occasional sneeze echoing down the stone corridors. Ulfric tucks his logbook under one arm and mutters, "We'll deal with you properly at Matins," as if the moon will be formally reprimanded. Back at his cell, he lights a stubby candle and rolls out a tattered scroll labeled Lunar Misbehavior, Volume 2. He adds a new note. Moon reappeared briefly. Looked guilty. Investigate. He also sketches a tiny frowning moon with shifty eyes. You settle into a corner with an old wool blanket. The night outside is still. The stars are out now, crisp and uncaring. But Ulfric's battle continues. He stares at the window. He taps his chin. Then, he writes. If moon is late tomorrow, escalate situation. Possibly summon abbot. Possibly cheese offering. The cheese part is underlined 3 times. Eventually, the candle sputters low, and Ulfric yawns. The moon peeks out again, perfectly normal, as if it never left. Ulfric sighs. Show off. And with that, the monk finally drifts off, dreaming of calendars that behave and moons that stay put. You wake to the gentle creak of ancient hinges and the unmistakable scent of morning, damp stone, scorched porridge, and that odd herbal soap the monks swear by. Brother Ulfric is already up, robed and hunched, holding a steaming wooden mug of something that might once have been tea. His eyes are locked on the sky like a man scorned by a silver orb. Breakfast in the refectory is quiet except for a few whispered chants and the occasional spoon tapping against a wooden bowl. Ulfric is not eating. He's sketching. The moon again, this time with tiny legs and what looks like a backpack. His marginal note reads, Destination unknown. Perhaps Rome? You follow him through the cloister garden. The hedges are trimmed in careful lines, shaped like saints if you squint hard enough. Birds chirp with more rhythm than the monastery choir. A squirrel watches Ulfric with unsettling intensity. He nods at it as if they share some terrible lunar secret. Today is moon day, or so Ulfric insists. The monastery doesn't actually have a moon day, but Ulfric holds one anyway. He set up a small display by the scriptorium, wax models, crude diagrams, and a chalkboard that reads, Where is the moon really going? One mainstream historical fact, while monks didn't all study astronomy, some scriptoria housed celestial diagrams, borrowed from earlier Arabic and Byzantine sources. Lunar tables were used to determine Easter's date. Some monasteries even relied on older pagan sky charts, just quietly repurposed to seem less heretical. Ulfric gestures to his diagram. It features a large arrow pointing to northish, a sketch of a cloud wearing a crown, and what is definitely a confused chicken. Last night's disappearance, he explains gravely, suggests a pattern. Every third moon vanishes after matins, returns by prime, and glows slightly smugger. You glance at the diagram again. The cloud has been labeled Larry. Fringe tidbit, there's a 12th century English folktale about a monk who believed clouds were divine sheep herded by saints across the sky. If a saint was displeased, he might hide the moon behind his flock. Ulfric might not know the tale, but he's living it in spirit. He scribbles furiously on a scroll titled, The Moon's Emotional Patterns. Beneath it, a list. Withdrawn when rained upon. Offended by loud chanting. Enjoys Thursdays. Historians still argue whether monks like Ulfric were genuine scholars of natural phenomena or simply trying to impose a sense of order on an unpredictable cosmos. What's clear is that devotion and curiosity often walked hand in hand, and sometimes straight off a logic cliff. By midday, Brother Arnulf joins him, squinting at the moon sketches. Have you accounted for clouds? Arnulf asks. Ulfric looks scandalized. Clouds are accomplices, not causes. Arnulf shrugs and mutters something about last year's barley harvest being moody, too. He walks away with a piece of cheese, unmoved. Back in his study, Ulfric pulls out an older moon log from a dusty chest. It's labeled, Moons of Regret, Volume 1. The entries are Messier, ink blots, crossed-out observations, and one page that just says, Moon Seen. Stared back. He thumbs through the pages, murmuring aloud. Yes, yes, cloud interference, improper chanting pitch, oh, and that one time Brother Leo fell asleep on the sundial. You curl up on a bench. Outside, the clouds are gathering again. Ulfric stares upward. Do you think, he muses, the moon ever just needs a break? He writes it down. That evening, the monks gather for vespers, their chants echoing through the stone arches like soft waves. The moon should be visible by now. Ulfric excuses himself mid-hymn and rushes up the tower with an urgency usually reserved for fire or fresh pears. At the top, he breathes heavily and stares out the narrow window. Nothing. A blank sky. Just clouds. Again. He leans out slightly, whispering, "You're being dramatic." He flips open his log and writes. Moon, absent again. Suspected overheard Brother Arnulf's tone. Must reassure. He tears out a page, folds it like a letter, and tucks it into the window frame, an offering, or maybe an apology. Back downstairs, he re-enters the chant room just as the monks are finishing. He bows sheepishly. Brother Leo offers him a knowing look. Still hiding? Ulfric nods. She'll come around. You trail him to the dormitory. He stops at each cell door, muttering, "Good night," as if the moon might be hiding behind someone's cot. Finally in bed, Ulfric stares at the ceiling. He doesn't need to see the moon to know it's up there, mischievous, mysterious, and just slightly rude. He yawns and pulls a thin blanket over himself. Tomorrow, he whispers, we try the cheese offering again. You wake up to the sound of bees. Not buzzing wildly, just gently, like monks who forgot the lyrics to a hymn and are improvising in harmony. Brother Ulfric is already outside, standing in the herb garden in his worn sandals and a woolen robe that's somehow both too big and too short. He's got a small dish in his hand. It contains 3 pieces of goat cheese, 1 blackberry, and a crumpled note that says, "To the moon, let's start over. Today, you learn, is a cheese offering day." This isn't in the monastery's official rulebook. It's more of an Ulfric special. Once a week, he places a symbolic snack near the sundial, stares up at the sky, and whispers something along the lines of, "We are deeply sorry for yesterday's harp music." A mainstream historical fact, many medieval monasteries did, in fact, believe the moon had a significant impact on human behavior, agricultural rhythms, and even monastic discipline. Some even kept lunar logs to better plan fasts, harvests, or confessions. But none of them offered dairy products to the sky with this level of emotional commitment. Ulfric isn't entirely alone in his lunar devotion. Brother Milo, who oversees the beehives, walks past and raises a brow. Still wooing the heavens? He asks. Ulfric nods solemnly. This time I added extra rind. Milo shrugs. Can't hurt. The 2 monks stand silently as the clouds shuffle by, awkwardly lingering in the way you might at the end of a conversation you don't want to finish. Ulfric checks the sundial. It's not casting a shadow. Probably because it's cloudy. Again. He sighs, jots a note in the margin of his log. Shadowless sundial, suspicious. Perhaps sundial is in league with moon? Fringe tidbit, there's a record from a 13th century Spanish monastery of a monk who blamed bad weather and moon loss on dishonest geometry. He insisted triangles were hiding the truth of the heavens. He was gently reassigned to cabbage washing. Ulfric's logic is not so different. He's now suspicious of the sundial and potentially the west-facing window in the chapel. He walks over to a shed behind the herb patch and emerges with something wrapped in cloth. You watch him unfurl it, a mirror, slightly chipped, once used for shaving. He places it in front of the sundial and steps back to observe. New angle, he mutters, maybe she's shy. The moon, apparently, may respond to indirect flattery. Historians still argue whether some monks truly believed in the moon's personality or if this was a form of deeply poetic thinking born of isolation and years of scheduled chanting. Regardless, there are manuscripts that describe celestial bodies as creatures of temperament, even politics. Ulfric, of course, takes it a step further. He leans down and draws a small smiley face in the dirt beside the cheese dish. In case she needs encouragement. After midday prayers, he returns to check. The cheese is gone. His eyes widen. She took it. You glance around. There are suspicious goat prints nearby. The culprit is probably chewing contentedly behind a nearby wall, but Ulfric doesn't notice. Or he chooses not to. He races up to the tower to record the offering's success. Moon accepted cheese. Mood, hopeful. Plan, maintain goodwill via dairy. That evening, the sky begins to clear. Wisps of clouds retreat, revealing the edges of a waxing moon. Ulfric gasps. There she is, he whispers, beaming like a man reunited with a particularly elusive pen pal. The monks gather for Compline, and Ulfric is practically glowing. His voice rings louder during the psalms. His robe swishes more confidently. After prayers, he pulls out a fresh scroll. It's labeled, Lunar Courtship Rituals, Draft I. He writes. Day 1, offer cheese. Day 2, speak gently. Day 3, avoid jokes about craters. He pauses, then adds, if moon retreats, repeat step 1. Try blue cheese next time. You trail him to his cell. He lights a candle and sets it on the windowsill. The moonlight bounces through it, casting a fuzzy silver glow across his desk. He gazes at it in reverence. Look at her, he says. Trying to act like she wasn't avoiding us for a week. You both sit quietly. The room is warm now, the air full of the scent of beeswax, ink, and a faint trace of lavender. Ulfric pulls his blanket tighter around his shoulders. His notes are sprawled across the desk, some curling with the evening damp. He picks one up and reads it aloud. If moon returns with full brightness, it indicates either forgiveness or forgetfulness. He chuckles softly. Forgiveness, hopefully. She's been through worse. You rest against the wall. Outside, the moon glows steadily, unapologetic, ancient, and probably unaware of the emotional roller coaster she's caused in one wool-clad monk. Still, Ulfric smiles, closes his eyes, and whispers, thank you. He falls asleep sitting up, chin resting on the edge of his moon log, his ink-stained fingers curled like the phases he studies. The sky stays clear all night. You wake up to find Ulfric balancing a bowl of porridge on his elbow and a compass in his hand. He's whispering to the porridge like it's a very unhelpful scribe. The moon appeared in the northwest quadrant at matins, he murmurs, squinting at the bowl, which, unsurprisingly, doesn't respond. But by prime, she drifted to northeast-ish. That's at least a 40-degree betrayal. The compass needle is not cooperating either. Possibly because it's old. Possibly because it's actually a brooch someone dropped into the tool shed 30 years ago and Ulfric just assumed it was for navigation. Still, he sketches the movement with surprising accuracy. The moon's little arcs sweep across his parchment like a lazy goose tracking breadcrumbs. This morning, you'll be accompanying him on what he calls a lunar recovery circuit. You head into the forest trail behind the monastery. Birds chirp. Trees lean slightly, as if eavesdropping. Ulfric mutters to himself the whole way, occasionally stopping to poke at tree bark or check for signs of moon residue. You don't ask what that is. It's probably better not to know. A mainstream historical fact, many monastic communities followed the lunar calendar closely, not just for Easter, but also for fasting periods, feast days, and gardening. Monks were expected to chart the moon's phases with basic astronomy tools, armillary spheres, quadrants, or even the position of stars during nighttime vigils. Ulfric has none of those. He has string, a stick, and ambition. He pauses at a clearing and pulls a piece of string taut between two trees. Then he hangs a piece of parchment from the middle like a primitive mobile. On the parchment, a crude drawing of the moon, looking mildly annoyed. "It should pass here at sext," he says, as if he's directing traffic in the heavens. Fringe tidbit: a 14th-century Carthusian monk once attempted to hear the moon through a series of hanging bells arranged in a spiral. His notes insist he caught faint whispers on windless nights. His brethren suspected it was just Brother Paul talking in his sleep again. Ulfric, thankfully, is not using bells, yet. He sits on a log and begins whittling a small figurine. You glance over. It's another moon, this time smiling, perched atop what appears to be a goose. He labels it, Moon's Trusted Steed. Historians still argue whether medieval monks' personifications of celestial bodies were entirely sincere or simply allegorical, meant to teach moral lessons in a memorable way. Ulfric blurs the line completely, giving the moon a backstory, travel journal, and apparent food preferences. Back at the monastery, he installs his new parchment contraption in the courtyard and stations Brother Leo to watch it. If the wind shifts and she ducks under again, Ulfric warns, note the angle. Leo nods gravely, though he's also holding a pastry and may not fully grasp the assignment. Later that afternoon, Ulfric gathers the brothers for a moon council. This is not a scheduled event, but his enthusiasm makes it difficult to argue. "Brothers," he says, unfurling a scroll with the grace of a magician revealing a card trick, "I believe the moon is practicing avoidance." The brothers glance at one another. Someone coughs. "Consider," Ulfric continues, tapping at diagrams with a slightly burned spoon, "her shifting paths. Her delayed risings. Her inconsistency with shadows. She's, how shall I say it, ghosting us." No one knows what ghosting means, but the tone makes it sound serious. Ulfric presents Exhibit A, a chart made entirely out of breadcrumbs and jam. It lasts 5 minutes before a pigeon destroys the northern hemisphere. Exhibit B is a timeline of moon appearances, complete with tiny illustrations of Brother Milo reacting in increasing states of confusion. "I think she's trying to tell us something," Ulfric concludes. "But we're not listening." Brother Arnulf raises a hand. "Or, clouds?" "Clouds are decoys," Ulfric replies. "She sends them when she's feeling coy." You trail him after the meeting, half expecting him to compose a sonnet or build a moon-shaped pie. Instead, he heads to the library and starts pulling down dusty volumes. You peer over his shoulder. He's scanning a worn text titled Luni Motus, on the moods of the moon. The Latin is faded, but he reads aloud. In her silence, the moon teaches more than 1,000 sermons. He sighs. Finally, someone who gets it. He takes out a quill and begins a new page in his journal titled, Moon's Secret Teachings. The first bullet reads, "Appear inconsistently equals maintain mystery. Glow less when displeased. Never explain, never complain." He pauses. That last one might have been about a bishop. Still applies. The sun begins to set, and Ulfric returns to the courtyard. He lights a single candle and places it where the moon should appear. If she sees the candle, he reasons, maybe she'll feel welcome again. You sit beside him. The candle flickers. The shadows dance on the stones. The breeze carries the scent of baked rye, wood smoke, and lavender oil. Ulfric closes his eyes and breathes deeply. "I just want to understand her," he murmurs. "Not capture, not control. Just understand." And for a few minutes, the world is quiet, no bells, no charts, no pigeon interruptions. Just candlelight and sky. You look up. Still no moon. But Ulfric smiles anyway. "She's thinking about it," he whispers. The next morning, you find Ulfric in the orchard, up a ladder, holding a tangerine at arm's length against the sky. He rotates it slowly, squinting with the solemnity of an astronomer but the tools of a fruit vendor. She was exactly this full last Tuesday, he mutters. Unless the orchard clock lied again. You resist the urge to ask what an orchard clock is. Probably a tree that leans suggestively at noon. Below him, Brother Milo peers up with a skeptical eye. You're comparing the moon to citrus now? Ulfric, without looking down, replies, at least the tangerine stays where I put it. A mainstream historical fact, monks often tracked celestial events not only for religious calendars but also to inform agricultural rhythms. The moon's phases were believed to influence everything from fish spawning to lettuce planting. Lunar gardening still survives in folk traditions across Europe and South America. But Ulfric has made it a full-blown friendship. He jots in his moon log, experiment number 12, citrus orb approximation. Initial results, surprisingly moving. Then, as he descends the ladder, he pauses mid-step and says, what if she's jealous of the sun? You blink. What? Think about it, he says, landing with a puff of dust. Everyone praises the sun, blessings, odes, curtains drawn in its honor. The moon? She gets miscounted, forgotten, blamed for bad moods. Fringe tidbit, in a 15th century Provençal text, there's a story of a nun who claimed the moon sent her dreams out of envy for her sun devotion. The dreams featured clouds that sobbed and refused to move. The manuscript ends with, she took to wearing a silver veil in sympathy. Ulfric isn't quite at veil-wearing levels of solidarity, but he's clearly thinking about it. He walks with you through the cloister garden, pausing at a fountain. He tosses in a pebble and watches the ripples. Does that remind you of her? He asks. You say, you mean the reflection? He nods solemnly. Or the unreachable echo of her thoughts. A passing novice slips on a mossy stone. Ulfric doesn't notice. Instead, he kneels by the pool and draws a rough lunar cycle in the mud. He points at the waxing crescent. Hope. Then the full moon. Joy. The waning crescent. Melancholy, obviously. Historians still argue whether medieval interpretations of the moon were genuinely spiritual or simply symbolic expressions of earthly cycles. Some believed the moon's waxing and waning represented the Virgin Mary's sorrow and triumph. Others thought it was just a really handy calendar for knowing when to plant onions. Ulfric appears to believe both. And possibly that the moon is writing back. Back in the scriptorium, he pores over a set of illuminated manuscripts. But instead of reading them, he's smelling them. You lean in. They smell like dust and dried glue. Maybe time. Some inks, Ulfric explains, react to moonlight. Reveal secret messages. You stare at the text. Nothing happens. He nods. Tonight. Full moon. We'll know. You glance at the ceiling. There's no skylight in this room. That evening, just after Vespers, Ulfric emerges with a strange device, a wooden box lined with shards of mirror, string, and what appears to be a small lentil. He calls it the reflective correspondence engine. Its purpose? To bounce moonlight across a series of angled surfaces, straight into the scriptorium window. If she's listening, she'll respond. Respond how? Brother Milo asks. Ulfric doesn't answer. He's too busy angling the box on the monastery roof, tongue poking out in concentration. It's not perfect. The string slips. The lentil falls. But eventually, he adjusts it just so. You both sit in the window as moonlight trickles through. The manuscript glows exactly the same as before. Still, Ulfric gasps. There, did you see it? You say, no. Exactly. She's using absence to speak. You both fall silent. Somewhere, an owl hoots. A cow moos mournfully. The candle on the desk sputters. Ulfric sighs. I think she's trying to apologize, he whispers. For all the confusion. You raise a brow. By glowing normally? By letting me wait, he says. Waiting is a form of love. You can't argue with that. Not at this hour, not in this lighting. He pulls out the moon log. Day 14, tangerine experiment helpful. Day 14, evening emotional breakthrough during absence. Note, build larger reflective engine. Possibly involve lentils. As he writes, the moon rises fully into view, silver, round, untouched by ladders or diagrams or fruit analogies. She just is. Ulfric looks up, and for once, he doesn't say anything. He just smiles, his face bathed in silver light, and leans back into his chair with the expression of someone who's finally received a letter after years of sending his own into the wind. The next day, Ulfric is in a surprisingly upbeat mood. He whistles while he walks, badly, but enthusiastically, carrying a scroll that's been folded into the shape of a swan. You ask if it's another moon message. No, he says brightly. It's to the moon this time. He unrolls the scroll with great care. It's a formal apology, written in precise calligraphy with generous spacing and liberal use of the phrase "My sincerest celestial regrets." There's also a crude drawing of a monk bowing toward a crescent. She deserves to know I'm not mad, Ulfric explains. Just misunderstood. Mainstream historical fact, monasteries often produced highly artistic manuscripts that combined devotion with meticulous astronomy. Moon phases were sometimes incorporated into the margins of psalters or books of hours, especially those used for determining feast days. Some calendars even tracked eclipses decades in advance, just in case the monks lived that long. Ulfric's manuscript, though, won't be predicting eclipses anytime soon. Unless one is caused by spilled ink and a shaky drawing hand. Still, his affection for the moon is unwavering. You accompany him to the bell tower. It's not a regular mailing location, but Ulfric believes that height brings sincerity. He places the scroll on a flat stone, weights it with a plumb, for gravitas, and steps back. If she wants it, he says, she'll take it. You both watch in silence for a while. Nothing happens. A bird flutters by, uninterested. Well, he shrugs, mail can be slow. He begins sketching a new invention, a device that sings the moon's name using harmonized wind chimes and a dried squash. Fringe tidbit, a 13th-century German mystic claimed she could hear celestial music by dangling pine cones from her ears and standing in still ponds. Her abbess allowed it, once. Afterward, the pond was declared off-limits and the pine cones were repurposed for incense. Ulfric would have approved. That night, he sets up his moon-singing contraption in the garden. It consists of chimes, a rotating spoon powered by dripping water, and something that might once have been a shoehorn. You lie on the grass nearby, watching clouds drift lazily across the stars. The spoon rotates. The chimes clink. A breeze stirs the trees just enough to make the contraption wheeze out a note that sounds vaguely like, "Oh." Ulfric beams. She heard that. You nod politely. He starts pacing. I think we're making progress. Maybe not in words, but in resonance. She's responding with her silence. Or, you suggest, she's responding by not smiting us for the shoehorn. Exactly, he says, entirely missing the joke. It's passive grace. Historians still argue whether monks like Ulfric were eccentric anomalies or examples of a broader mystical tradition that sought to bridge the physical and divine through symbols. Some scholars believe moon devotion among monastics was partly rooted in earlier pagan traditions, quietly absorbed into Christian observance. Others think monks just had a lot of time and very few hobbies. Ulfric, however, is now writing a hymn. It goes something like this. O silver sister of silent skies, guide our thoughts when candles die. Though clouds obscure thy shining brow, accept this squash-shaped gift somehow. The rhyme scheme is generous, but heartfelt. He hums the melody under his breath for the rest of the evening. Later, during Compline, he sits apart from the others in the chapel, gazing out the arched window. The moon, once again, is nowhere to be found. You brace for disappointment. But Ulfric only nods, as if that's what he expected all along. She's keeping her distance, he whispers, but not her disapproval. She's watching. You ask, how can you tell? He taps his temple. Because I feel slightly less confused than usual. A novice sneezes, and Ulfric takes it as confirmation. He returns to his cell and begins compiling his next great work, Lunar Dialogue, Volume 1. Chapter 1, Moon refuses to comment. Chapter 2, Moon sends cloud instead. Chapter 3, Moon agrees by not disagreeing. Each chapter ends with the same note, to be continued if she allows it. You close your eyes in your own cot, the faint sound of wind chimes echoing in the courtyard, and the scent of lavender oil wafting through the air. And just before sleep tugs you under, you hear Ulfric's voice through the stone wall. Good night, Moon. The next morning, Ulfric has a new theory. You spot it in his expression before he even speaks. That glint, the one that usually ends with something being tied to something else and balanced atop a goat. I think, he says, clutching a half-melted beeswax candle, the moon is hiding on purpose. She's playing hard to illuminate. You blink. He nods, convinced of his own pun. She wants to be wooed. Not studied, not charted. Wooed. So I need to adjust my approach. Mainstream historical fact, in many medieval monastic communities, courtly love and celestial symbolism weren't entirely separate concepts. The moon was often imagined as a lady of mystery, serenity, and quiet longing. Monks weren't exactly writing love poems to her in the romantic sense, but they did use metaphors that would have fit right into a troubadour's ballad. Ulfric is absolutely blurring that line. Today's plan? Poetry. Not just any poetry. Moon liturgical verse in alternating rhymed Latin and sighs. He performs the first stanza in the refectory. It includes 3 verses, 2 wistful moans, and a pause for dramatic weeping. The kitchen monk applauds politely, while a younger novice slips a spoon into his sleeve as if fearing it might become part of the next performance. Ulfric bows anyway. Art, he whispers, is the one language she truly understands. You accompany him to the cloister's herb garden. He sits cross-legged between thyme and dill, composing his next verse on a wax tablet. Every few lines, he tastes a leaf to ground himself. Fringe tidbit, there's a record in a 12th century herbal manual that suggests chewing hyssop while moon-gazing might align the humors and open the dreams. Whether Ulfric has read this or simply invented it is unclear, but he's now nibbling rosemary and muttering about emotional frequencies. You peer over his shoulder at the newest draft. Moon of stillness, bride of mist. Why deny me your nightly tryst? I built a chime, I carved a spoon. All for you, elusive moon. The rhymes are improving. Slightly. Historians still argue whether this blend of monastic devotion and poetic longing was spiritually productive or merely the side effect of cloister-induced eccentricity. Some interpret such behaviors as evidence of divine obsession, others call it sincere boredom plus moonlight. Ulfric doesn't care either way. He's composing a full sequence, Luna Cantata, to be performed with reed flutes and a background chorus of sheep. He hasn't asked the sheep yet. That night, during moonrise, he leads you and 2 other semi-willing monks into the field beyond the walls. There, amid the fireflies and the soft chirping of frogs, Ulfric begins the first ever lunar serenade conducted in Gregorian plain chant with occasional hiccups. You hold the lantern. The others hum along, sort of. At one point, a barn owl flies overhead, hooting. Ulfric freezes. Was that her? You say, I think it was just an owl. He looks wistfully at the clouds. Still. She's sending messengers. When the chant ends, you all stand in silence, eyes on the sky. The moon peeks from behind a cloud, faint and soft. She's listening, Ulfric whispers. He kneels in the grass and pulls out the moon log again. Day 16, performed cantata I, owl appeared. Coincidence? Maybe not. Feeling hopeful. Wind chime remains intact. Reed flutes need tuning. Note, send thank you thought to owl. You help him gather his instruments as dew settles over the grass. Back inside, Ulfric places a single violet on the windowsill. For her, he says, then turns to you and adds, she likes small gestures. You ask, what happens if she never responds? He shrugs, smiling. Doesn't matter. I'll keep singing. You glance at the moon one last time before bed, barely a sliver now, but still there, still glowing faintly through a curtain of stars. And even though you know it's just reflected sunlight, you can't help but think she's blushing. By now, the entire monastery has grown accustomed to Ulfric's lunar courtship. There's a quiet sort of acceptance, like when someone adopts a goose and teaches it to ring the prayer bell. No one questions the logic, they simply step around the feathers. Today, Ulfric unveils his boldest theory yet. The moon, he says, spreading out a scroll so long it curls into the fish barrel, has a schedule. A deliberate, coded pattern. I've almost cracked it. You peer at the scroll. It's an intricate grid of dates, symbols, smudged ink, and something that might be a soup recipe. In the upper corner is a heading, lunar temperament and monastic vegetable yield, correlated. Mainstream historical fact, some medieval agricultural calendars did indeed link the moon's phases to crop success. It was believed that root vegetables preferred waning moons, while leafy greens thrived under waxing ones. Whether or not this was based in botany or wishful thinking is still up for debate. Ulfric, however, takes it further. Observe, he says, pointing to a sequence of radish drawings, on days when she appears between clouds in the second quarter, Brother Anton burns the porridge. You blink. Coincidence? Or lunar mischief, he says solemnly. Fringe tidbit, a 14th century Scottish monastery blamed a batch of spoiled ale on a moody moon. The brewing log suggested that the yeast had turned rebellious under her cold stare. The record ends with a monk scribbling, next time, brew with eyes closed. Ulfric is determined to avoid such disasters. He's constructed what he calls a linometer, a device made from a broken abacus, 3 quail feathers, and a candle stub. Its purpose? To measure her mood, not her movement. When you ask how it works, he gestures dramatically. By intuition. And mild guesswork. That evening, he sets the linometer on the chapel's eastern sill, directly in view of where the moon should rise. Then you wait. And wait. And wait. Finally, a pale sliver emerges. The linometer shudders, because of the wind, probably, and one of the feathers tips slightly to the left. Ulfric gasps. Do you see? She nudged it. Maybe it's just the breeze, you say. She is the breeze, he whispers, entranced. He scribbles another line into his moon log. Day 17, feather shift. Slight. Left-leaning. Possibly approving. Candle did not flicker equals good omen. Back in the refectory, Brother Milo raises an eyebrow. So the moon now controls poultry feathers? Ulfric just smiles, pours himself a cup of lentil broth, and hums the second verse of Luna cantata. Later that night, he recruits you to help set up a moon symposium. It's just the two of you, 3 folding stools, and a plate of pickled beets, her favorite, he claims. You ask if the moon will be attending. She already is, he says, gesturing to the sky. Always. He begins to lecture the moon on recent monastic updates. A new cow has been acquired. The fig trees are slow to bloom. Brother Edric lost his sandals again. Each item is punctuated by a small toast of beet juice. Historians still argue whether such lunar rituals were expressions of loneliness or genuine mystical curiosity. Some believe they were a safe outlet for monastic longing, a way to feel intimate with something vast and unreachable, yet always present. Others say, no, monks just had way too many beets. Ulfric offers the moon one final toast, to quiet companions, and unpredictable calendars. Then, in a low voice, he recites his favorite line again, waiting is a form of love. You sit beside him in silence as the wind rustles through the fig leaves and the beets glisten faintly in the moonlight. A soft cloud brushes across the moon's face. Ulfric nods. She blinks slowly when she's shy. You write that down in the moon log for him. He's too moved to hold a quill. And as the bell tower chimes midnight, you both remain there, 2 monks, 1 moon, and a tray of untouched pickles. The next day begins with a commotion. Ulfric has misplaced his moon log. Again. He retraces his steps across the monastery, muttering possibilities. Did I leave it in the grain cellar? Did Brother Milo steal it for a joke? Or, he gasps, clutching his robe, did she take it? You suggest checking under his mattress. He does, and finds 3 onions, a clay whistle, and a drawing of a duck labeled Moon. Disguised. Mainstream historical fact, medieval monks often kept private journals, sometimes called day books or spiritual logs. These might contain everything from weather observations to dreams to sins confessed and then crossed out with flourishes. It wasn't unusual for such books to go missing, often accidentally baked into bread if left too close to the oven. Fringe tidbit: a 15th century English monk once blamed a missing psalter on a nocturnal theft by stars. The book was later found in a basket of turnips. Ulfric suspects a cosmic borrowing. She just wanted to check my progress, he says. She's a feedback-oriented celestial body. You find the log in the chapel, behind a curtain, nestled beside an old thurible. He kisses it gently and murmurs, she returned it unharmed. A sign. Inside, he finds a page he didn't write. In a different hand, possibly his own, but more wobbly, it reads. To see her is not to hold her. To hold her is not to own her. To lose the log is part of knowing her. Ulfric stares at the page, then beams. She left me poetry. You hesitate. Are you sure you didn't write that during vigils last night? He considers this. If I did, it was under her influence. He adds a new entry. Day 18, log returned. Unexpected moon poem inside. May have ghostwritten it myself. Either way, a gift. Later, Ulfric decides to build a moon decanter, a glass bottle meant to trap a beam of moonlight for later meditation. You help him polish a greenish bottle and tie it with a ribbon. He places it in the garden at precisely moonrise, aligning it with a piece of polished bronze and whispering the phrase, Lux me tanget, said Sine Ustion, let the light touch me, but without burning. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely believed light could be bottled or whether these rituals were symbolic. Some argue that moonlight was associated with purity and inspiration, others note that storing beams in bottles was more a poetic gesture than a practical one. Ulfric, though, takes it seriously. He checks the bottle an hour later and declares it 80% spiritually full. You ask how he can tell. It feels lighter, he says, but emotionally heavier. You write that down. The next afternoon, he hosts a moon tasting. You're not sure what this means until he hands you a spoon and uncorks a jar of honey. She sweetened it last night, he says. You try a spoonful. It tastes like honey. See, he grins. She left her trace. At Compline, he kneels a little longer, bowing slightly toward the east. Just in case she's watching, he explains. Politeness matters. You find yourself doing the same, not bowing, exactly, but pausing to glance out the chapel window. The moon is full tonight, massive and low, wearing a faint halo like a sleepy crown. She's showing off, Ulfric whispers with pride. Then, suddenly serious, he turns to you. Tomorrow, I try direct communication. Spoken. Aloud. You ask, haven't you already been talking to her every day? Yes, he says, but this time, she might answer. And with that, he slips away into the corridor, leaving behind only a feather, a humming tune, and the scent of slightly burned parsley. The morning sun rises to find Ulfric rehearsing. He's standing in the courtyard, arms outstretched, murmuring a carefully prepared monologue to the fig tree. I need a strong opening, he says, something that speaks to both her vastness and her coyness. Maybe something like, O moon, pale queen of puddles. No, that sounds too amphibious. You suggest he try shorter phrases. Minimalism, he says. Yes, perhaps she prefers subtlety. Mainstream historical fact, medieval sermons and prayers often opened with invocations not just to saints, but to natural elements. The moon, though rarely addressed directly in official liturgy, did feature in monastic poetry and even in early mystical texts as a symbol of divine mystery and the ever-changing soul. Ulfric wants to go further. He wants an answer. He's convinced that tonight, if the angle is right, if the moon is full enough and the right incense is burned, she might reply. Fringe tidbit, in a 13th century Bohemian manuscript, there's a marginal note beside a moon chart that simply says, she said yes. No context. No elaboration. Just that. Scholars remain baffled, and mildly enchanted. Ulfric chooses the chapel roof for his grand attempt. You climb up with him, carefully, carrying a small rug, 2 candlesticks, and a bag of roasted chickpeas, in case she wants an offering. The sun dips low. You sit cross-legged on cold tiles as night brushes the horizon. Ulfric stands tall, arms open, eyes fixed on the eastern sky. And then, there she is. The moon, round and glowing, heavy with secrets. He clears his throat. O moon, he begins, gentle custodian of nocturnal consistency. He falters. No. Wait. He tries again. O moon, thou who curdles milk with thy gaze. You stifle a cough. Who blesses the badger and bewilders the goose? He's off script now, flowing freely. Who inspires soup and sorrow in equal measure? Brother Ulfric of Lesser Gregly, do hereby request an audience, a whisper, a nudge, a flicker, or even just the decency of a cold wind. A pause. He squints. I think she's blinking. You stare at the moon. No blinking. But a faint wisp of cloud does pass across it like a veil. Ulfric's breath catches. He kneels. Folds his hands. And whispers, what is your name? You glance sideways, half expecting thunder. But there's only quiet. Then, softly, a wind stirs. Not dramatic. Just enough to rattle the candles. One flame flickers, leans sideways, then rights itself. Ulfric exhales. She said something. Historians still argue whether moments like these were mystical communion or mere weather. Some suggest that early monastics used such rituals as a mirror for internal reflection, projecting hopes and needs onto a receptive night sky. Others think, well, Ulfric might just be lonely. But he is beaming. He writes feverishly into his moon log. Day 19, direct address attempted. Cloud responded. Candle danced. Name remains unknown, but tone was generous. Chickpeas untouched equals polite decline. Back on solid ground, Ulfric seems lighter, as if some internal burden has lifted. I think, he says, sipping warm goat's milk, she liked it. That night, you both sit outside the dormitory window, just watching the moon hang there, vast and indifferent and luminous. She's always there, he says softly. Even when she's not. You nod, feeling the cool breath of the night curl around your ankles. Ulfric hums the opening line of Lunar Cantata 2, his voice drifting somewhere between a sigh and a lullaby. And for the first time in many nights, the moon feels a little less silent. The following days are unusually calm. Ulfric, once frenzied with feather calculations and lunar schedules, is almost serene. He no longer races through corridors muttering about beam angles or misplaced scrolls. Instead, he moves slowly, like a man who has been given quiet permission to rest. "She heard me," he says one morning, plucking a lavender sprig from the monastery garden. "That's enough for now. But you know him too well to assume that means he's done." Later that afternoon, you find him drawing. The parchment is crowded with crescents, scribbled eyes, orbit lines that loop and spiral into nonsense. At the bottom is a phrase, written carefully, "Her silence is an answer too." Mainstream historical fact, many medieval mystics recorded silence as a form of divine reply. In monastic culture, the absence of a clear sign was often reinterpreted as a test, or as a gesture of trust, God, or, in Ulfric's case, the moon, simply letting the faithful figure it out. Ulfric leans into this notion. "She's letting me breathe," he says. "She's finished her part." Fringe tidbit: in a 12th century Andalusian monastery, one monk claimed to have received celestial guidance from a quiet white lantern in the sky. His vision led to an architectural innovation. He redesigned the roof gutters to imitate lunar craters. They were wildly impractical, but deeply symbolic. Ulfric's next move? "We need a lunar garden," he declares. You follow him out to the back corner of the cloister, where weeds have taken up permanent residence. "This," he says, sweeping an arm across a patch of stones and dead thistle, "shall be her sanctuary." You ask what, exactly, makes a garden lunar. He lists 3 requirements. Only pale or silver plants. Must be watered during moonrise. Absolutely no carrots. They're smug, he says. The next week becomes a slow-motion flurry of planting garlic, white sage, dusty miller, and moonflower. You help arrange the stones in a crescent shape and carve a small plaque that reads, "For she who drifts." At dusk, you both water the seedlings with ladles from a chipped ceramic bowl. The moon hangs low and gentle, her face blurred slightly by a thin haze. "She's watching," Ulfric says, not looking up. You hum in agreement. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely saw these rituals as divine or whether they were structured forms of introspection. Some say it was theater for the soul, a way to step outside daily routines and rehearse awe. Others argue that it was a kind of emotional gardening. You plant wonder, you water it with ritual, and wait to see if anything blooms. One night, the moonflower blossoms. Just one, and only for a moment. You nearly miss it. The petals unfold like slow-motion breath, white as parchment and trembling slightly in the wind. Ulfric gasps. She blinked back. He adds a new log entry. Day 24, first bloom. Moon present. Flower shy. Garden working. We'll try music next. Indeed, the next day he borrows a lute. You didn't know Ulfric could play the lute. Turns out, neither did he. He strums something between a psalm and a goat dying of embarrassment. But the moon's out, and he's smiling, and even the thistles seem a little charmed. You sit beside him, sipping weak nettle tea, listening to the halting chords and breathy attempts at melody. "She's humming with me," he says after one particularly clumsy passage. "She's just doing it very, very quietly." You don't correct him. Instead, you pick up the second lute. It's missing a string and smells faintly of marmalade, but you strum along. Badly. Joyfully. 2 monks, 2 lutes, and a sky full of moon. The garden rustles in approval, or maybe it's just the night wind, the same wind that's been brushing against ancient cloisters and hopeful humans for centuries. You play on. The next morning begins with dew and disagreement. Ulfric insists that last night's duet has elevated his communication with the moon to Phase 2. What's Phase 2, you ask cautiously, biting into a very dry oat biscuit. He wipes his fingers on his robe, leans in dramatically, and whispers, dream visitation. You stare at him. Yes, he continues. If I play for her while waking, she may visit me while sleeping. That's how real bonds form, with reciprocal dreaming. Mainstream historical fact, medieval monks often believed dreams could be messages from the divine. Entire volumes were devoted to decoding their symbols. Foxes meant deceit, water meant purification, and moons, well, meanings varied widely. Sometimes they meant feminine mystery, sometimes madness, and occasionally flatulence. Medieval symbolism was flexible. Fringe tidbit: a 10th century monk named Udo claimed the Virgin Mary appeared in his dream to scold him for using too much butter on his lentils. He reformed immediately. Ulfric wants to prepare properly for his moon dream. This means fasting, slightly, and sleeping on a pillow stuffed with moonwort and fennel. I don't want a confusing dream, he says. No ducks, no exorcisms, no misplaced archbishops. Just her. You help him gather ingredients from the apothecary shed, dodging suspicious stares from Brother Anselm, who's still angry about last week's unauthorized cucumber scrying. By evening, Ulfric has constructed what he calls a dream nest. It's a lumpy mattress surrounded by candles, a bowl of sheep's milk, and a bundle of sage tied to a ladle. She'll know this is for her, he says. You nod. He dons his softest robe, mutters a moon chant you suspect he invented, and settles in. You stay nearby, just in case. Not for safety, just for curiosity. He drifts off. Silence. Then snoring. Loud snoring. The kind that bends candles. You sit in the flickering glow, watching the moon hang above the cloister archway. She looks as she always does, unbothered, elegant, slightly smug. The next morning, Ulfric wakes with a gasp. I saw her. You lean forward. What happened? She was enormous. Like, bread oven enormous. Floating above a lake of melted glass. And she said, he pauses, brow furrowed, she said, don't forget to water the garlic. You blink. She also gave me a walnut, he adds, pulling a crushed walnut from his robe. It was in my hand when I woke up. Historians still argue whether dreams of celestial bodies in monastic life were real spiritual experiences or byproducts of poor nutrition and strong herbs. Either way, Ulfric is glowing. He records the dream in his moon log. Day 25, dream confirmed. Moon enormous. Message unclear but probably agricultural. Gift received, walnut. From then on, every night becomes a new experiment. One night he sleeps with an amethyst under his tongue. Another, he chants Gregorian syllables backward. One evening, you find him asleep in the root cellar, hugging a cabbage. She said cooler air improves reception, he murmurs. Despite the absurdity, something about it is comforting. Ulfric isn't chasing the moon anymore. He's communing with her, through dreams, through soil, through oddly carved turnips. He creates what he calls a moon message chest. Inside it, scraps of poetry, smooth stones, pressed sage leaves, and a tiny scroll that reads, "Are you proud of me?" Each item is placed with reverence. You catch yourself doing the same, leaving little objects outside the chapel window, half hoping the moon notices, a white pebble, a folded paper crane, a sliver of beeswax. The moon never answers directly, but the silence feels less silent. More like a pause between lines of a song you're both learning. One night, Ulfric gives you a feather. She gave it to me in last night's dream, he says. Said it was for you. You raise an eyebrow. She said you're an excellent observer. You take the feather, hold it up to the moonlight, and smile. Maybe she did say that. Or maybe Ulfric did. Either way, it feels real. Things take a turn when Ulfric decides the moon needs a library. Not a big one, just a modest collection of scrolls, all dedicated to her. She's been so generous, he explains, carefully dusting a shelf in the southeast alcove. The least we can do is curate something for her to read. You wonder aloud if the moon reads. Ulfric doesn't miss a beat. Of course she does. She's extremely literate. Just look at tides, very grammatical behavior. Mainstream historical fact, medieval monasteries often had small libraries of copied manuscripts, typically centered around scripture, law, or the lives of saints. But some monks copied poetry, herbal guides, even speculative celestial charts, texts not strictly approved, but tolerated for their curious usefulness. Ulfric's moon collection is eclectic. He starts with a weather log from Brother Ulfric, a list of bird names in Old Frisian, and a poorly illustrated bestiary that features something labeled moon weasel. Fringe tidbit: in a 13th century Cistercian archive, a monk named Ulfric compiled a text titled, Verses for the Moon When She is Shy. No copies survive, only a letter from another monk complaining, it made the sky feel closer, which is unsettling. Ulfric writes his own entries. Titles include Why the Moon Probably Hums at Dusk, On the Softness of Her Curves Compared to Soft Cheese, Lunar Reflections, a dialogue between an eel and a vicar. You help him bind them in linen, though the glue smells suspiciously like old turnips. He shelves them reverently, always aligning the covers to face east. Just in case she peeks in, he says. You ask how she'll read them. She's the moon, he replies. She's clever. Later that week, Ulfric begins offering her readings aloud. Each night, beneath her glow, he recites select passages from the moon collection. His voice is calm, almost hypnotic. He reads an ode to her silence, then a short treatise on moss shapes. And the moon listens. Or rather, she continues being present, which, in Ulfric's eyes, counts as full engagement. He adds a new entry to the moon log. Day 28, began literary exchange. Read aloud to her, Chapter 3, Moonlight and Goat Breath. No clouds. No interruptions. Atmosphere, receptive. That night, you both stay long after the reading ends. Ulfric lies on the stone bench, staring upward. You lie beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Neither of you speaks. The monastery bells ring midnight, echoing across the cloister walls. Somewhere, an owl hoots, quite possibly in Latin. The moon hangs above like an idea you can't quite finish. Do you think she's ever been lonely? Ulfric whispers. You reply that she probably has. Everyone glows better with company. He nods slowly. The next day, Ulfric starts writing a story. It's for her, he says, ink smudging his fingers. A bedtime story. Maybe she gets tired too. You smile, watching him scribble away, pausing only to sniff his inkpot or chase a beetle off the page. Historians still argue whether such efforts were symbolic gestures of worship or simply the natural human urge to speak into the quiet and hope something answers. Some scholars suggest moon-facing rituals were an early form of therapy, where monks projected emotional needs onto celestial bodies too dignified to judge them. Others believe some monks just really liked the moon. Ulfric would say both are true. By evening, his story is complete. He reads it aloud, slowly, sweetly, with pauses between each line. It's about a moon who forgets how to shine, and the small creatures below who whisper her name until she remembers. When he finishes, he places the scroll on the chapel windowsill and says nothing more. The moon hangs still and bright, like she's holding her breath. And for once, even Ulfric seems content with the silence. The moon scroll disappears the next morning. Vanished, poof. Gone. Not a puff of ash or a curl of parchment to be seen. Ulfric stares at the empty sill like it just confessed a secret. You saw me put it there, right? he asks. You nod. You'd watched him place it delicately, as if the stone might bruise. Mainstream historical fact: in some medieval cloisters, objects left in symbolic places, like windows facing east or altar steps, were considered offerings, not to be retrieved. If a wind took it, or a bird, or even a mischievous brother, well, that just meant the offering had been received. Fringe tidbit: in the archives of an obscure Bavarian monastery, there's a record of a monk who claimed the moon took his quill pen after he wrote her a sonnet. He stopped writing after that, saying, "She already knows my voice." Ulfric, naturally, takes this as confirmation. She read it, he says, and took it with her. You suggest that maybe a goat ate it. He frowns. Too poetic for goats. Later that afternoon, Ulfric holds what he calls a moon gratitude procession. It's just the two of you, walking in slow circles around the cloister garden while humming an off-key tune he insists is ancient and lunar. You suspect it's adapted from a drinking song. He carries a bowl of white pebbles and tosses one gently into the pond with each step. For her brightness. For her patience. For not laughing when I sang that time my voice cracked. You ask if this is necessary. She didn't have to take the scroll, he says. She chose to. Historians still argue whether monks truly believed their ritual actions reached celestial bodies or if these acts were more about inner alignment. One theory suggests the monastic repetition of gesture and chant served as a way to stabilize turbulent thought, like whispering to the moon was a way of whispering to oneself without feeling alone. That evening, Ulfric begins building a moon shrine. It's not large. Just a collection of objects that remind her she's loved, as he puts it. You help arrange. A silver thimble. A quartz pebble. A carved wooden owl. A loaf of barley bread shaped like a crescent. And a tiny bell for night breezes to ring. The shrine sits in the corner of the garden, half hidden behind lavender and half illuminated by moonlight. It becomes a routine. Each night, you both sit by the shrine, sip a sleepy herb tea, tonight it's mugwort and lemon balm, and just watch her. You swear the moon seems brighter some nights. Rounder. Slightly more amused. Ulfric starts drawing her again. But this time, the sketches are peaceful, no frantic arrows or tiny, panicked monks. Just gentle curves, light shading, and an occasional smiling face. You ask him what changed. She's here, he says. Not out there. Here. You don't ask for clarification. You already know. That night, before bed, you find a small scroll on your pillow. No name. Just 2 words. She noticed. You don't ask who wrote it. You don't need to, you wake to the sound of humming. It's Ulfric, standing barefoot in the cloister, arms wide, face tilted skyward. His robe is on backward. Again. I dreamed she danced, he says, voice soft and awestruck. Across the sky. In circles. Over my head. You offer him a piece of rye toast and gently turn his robe around. You also dreamed you were a spoon last week. He nods solemnly. Yes. But I was a very good spoon. Mainstream historical fact: monastic dream journals were a common practice among certain orders, especially in the 12th and 13th centuries. They weren't always about divine revelations. Sometimes monks documented symbolic images, curious metaphors, or even the weather inside their dreams. It was thought to be part of the path to spiritual refinement. Fringe tidbit: a monastic record from 1174 includes a marginal note from a Brother Leo that reads, "Dreamed of a sheep choir. They sang in Latin. I joined in. Woke hoarse." Next to it is a crude drawing of a sheep holding a hymn book. Ulfric has been cataloging his dreams with increasing devotion. His entries have grown imaginative. Day 32, Moon arrived wearing a garland of dandelions. Told me to be less crunchy. Not sure what it means. Day 33, flew over Abbey with moon as hot air balloon. Crows cheered. Probably symbolic. Day 34, she said she likes the new shrine. Smiled. Then turned into bread. I wept. Despite their strangeness, there's something comforting about them. You've started dreaming of the moon, too, though yours are less poetic. Last night, you argued with her about soup. Ulfric insists this means she's opening dialogue with you. She likes a good debate, he says, stirring a cauldron of nettle tea with a spoon carved into a crescent. Also, soup is a deeply spiritual topic. That evening, he hosts what he calls Moon Forum. It's not as official as it sounds. Just the two of you sitting on crates under the stars, posing questions aloud to the sky. What makes you wax? Ulfric asks. Is it a diet thing? Do you ever wish for clouds just to get a break? You add. Do you get bored? Do you blink slowly or all at once? Did you really take the scroll? Or was it Brother Anselm? Historians still argue whether certain monastic rituals involving the heavens were meant to channel divine knowledge or simply human loneliness. There are accounts of monks confessing their deepest worries to the stars, not for absolution, but just to hear the sound of their own honesty. Ulfric, for all his silliness, is sincere. Later that week, he begins constructing what he calls a moon compass. It's not a navigational tool, but more of an emotional one. It tells me where my feelings point, he explains, holding up a piece of wood with string, quartz, and what appears to be a raisin glued to the center. You ask if it works. He stares at it. The string swings gently east. Yes, he whispers. She wants me to water the beans. You don't question it. The beans do look a little dry. You both spend the afternoon in quiet gardening. Ulfric sings to the moon while he hoes the soil, pausing only to wave at her. You arrange the moon shrine, replacing wilted herbs with fresh lavender. And that night, something strange happens. As you sit beneath her silver glow, sipping yet another cup of sleepy tea, tonight, chamomile, cardamom, and something mysterious Ulfric found near the mill, you feel her. Not in a dramatic, celestial thunderclap way. Just a soft nudge. A calm, glowing hush. The cloister fades. The stone beneath your feet feels warm. The stars seem to hum. And for a brief moment, just a breath, the moon feels close. Like she's leaning in. Listening. Smiling. And then, she's back. High above. Pale and quiet. You exhale. Ulfric says nothing. He just places a pebble beside the shrine and bows. The next morning, Ulfric announces he's fasting, for clarity. Not from food. From shadows. You blink. From shadows? Yes, he says solemnly, I feel they're interfering with my lunar alignment. Too many confusing silhouettes. You follow him as he moves through the cloister with exaggerated care, holding a wooden spoon like a divining rod to detect shady patches. When he finds one, he tiptoes around it like it's a sleeping bear. Mainstream historical fact, monastic fasts in the Middle Ages weren't always about food. Some monks abstained from speaking, contact with others, certain colors, or even sunlight. The belief was that sensory denial brought clarity and divine presence, though scholars debate how effective or widespread the more eccentric practices really were. Fringe tidbit, a marginal note in a 14th century scriptorium manual mentions a monk who once fasted from seeing round things to resist temptation. Apparently, he was obsessed with wheels, coins, and eggs. The note ends abruptly with, he did not last. Ulfric's shadow fast lasts approximately 3 hours. He breaks it when he sees the silhouette of a passing duck on the courtyard wall and whispers, it looked like she winked. After that, he leans into shadows instead of avoiding them. He even draws them, sketches of lunar shadows on parchment, often turning them into soft, rounded shapes labeled things like partial swoon or enthusiastic eclipse. You start seeing them too, moon-shaped blotches on cloister walls, circular stains on flagstones, even the rounded rim of the communal soup pot begins to feel lunar. Everything is her, Ulfric says. Everything is not her. It's all the same. You're pretty sure that's both profound and completely meaningless. Later, during Vespers, Ulfric introduces a new chant, one he claims came to him in a dream involving moonlight, marmalade, and a talking duck named Cyril. The chant goes like this. Moon above, round and shy. Gaze upon our soup tonight. Guide our spoons, our sleepy eyes. And tuck us in with starlit sighs. You hum it once, just to humor him. By midnight, you've caught yourself humming it again. Historians still argue whether such personal hymns were tolerated or quietly erased from official records. Some abbots viewed personal chants as signs of excessive ego, while others considered them harmless expressions of devotion. In Ulfric's case, the abbot has long since given up trying to correct him. He just sighs and makes the sign of the cross whenever he hears moon references in liturgical Latin. You suspect the abbot secretly hums the chant too. One rainy evening, Ulfric makes a startling declaration. He's written a liturgy. For lunar devotion, he says. A formal one. It involves 3 potatoes, a silk ribbon, and a very small dance. You attend the debut. You're the only attendee. It takes place at the moon shrine, now adorned with ivy and a surprisingly well-painted fresco of the moon holding a goose. The ceremony is part prayer, part interpretive mime, part unintentional comedy. At one point he forgets the steps to the moonward shuffle and accidentally kicks over the barley loaf. Still, he finishes with a deep bow and whispers, "For your light, always." You clap quietly. It's absurd. It's touching. It's so utterly Ulfric. That night, the moon doesn't show. Clouds roll in, thick and unrelenting. Ulfric takes it well, at first. She's shy, he says. She's sleeping, he says. She's testing us, he says. By the 4th night of cloud cover, he's pacing the cloister like a nervous cat. What if she's gone? You remind him that she's always there, even when you can't see her. He nods, but his eyes are troubled. Later, you find a note tucked under your mug. If you see her, tell her I miss her glow. The moon returns on the 6th night. She peeks out through a break in the clouds, silvery and serene, like nothing happened. Ulfric gasps audibly, nearly dropping his bowl of turnip stew. She came back. You both scramble outside, him still chewing, you wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of lavender and ink. The garden is still damp from the afternoon rain, but neither of you cares. You just stand there, staring up. She's probably wondering where we went, you say. Ulfric points at the sky with his spoon. I never left. I was just clouded. Mainstream historical fact, lunar devotion held spiritual significance in many cultures, medieval Europe included. While formal Christian doctrine focused on sun metaphors, there was a robust tradition of tracking the moon's cycles for feast days, fasting calendars, and symbolic parallels, often quietly incorporated into personal worship. Fringe tidbit: in the margins of a 13th-century monk's breviary is a doodle of the moon sticking out her tongue at a frowning sun, next to the line, "She needs no witness but the tides." No one knows who drew it. Ulfric decides this moment calls for moon communion. You suspect it's just another excuse for biscuits. But you humor him anyway, lighting a candle while he sets out 2 mugs of warm honeyed milk and 3 oat biscuits for her. One of them is topped with a sliver of hard cheese. Is cheese lunar, you ask? It reflects light, he says. So yes. You both sit cross-legged on the cloister stones, chewing and sipping, moonlight pooling on the ground like it might solidify into silver. Ulfric bows low and whispers, "Thank you for returning." And just when it feels like you might drift off right there on the floor, the bell tower lets out a lonely, off-rhythm chime. You both jump. That wasn't me, Ulfric says quickly. You both stare at the bell. It sways gently, as if stirred by wind, or some celestial giggle. Historians still argue whether medieval monks actually believed in playful spirits, or if such events were merely folded into the rhythm of faith. Either way, bells ringing on still nights often found their way into monastery records under headings like minor miracle or unexplained weather. Later, as you prepare for bed, Ulfric insists on updating his moon log. Tonight's entry reads: Day 41, she vanished. Then returned. I forgave her. We're stronger now. You glance at your own pillow. No scroll this time, but there's a tiny quartz pebble. You're not sure if it's a gift, a prank, or something the moon actually dropped. You keep it anyway. Sleep comes easily that night. But sometime before dawn, you wake to the sound of scribbling. Ulfric sits by the window, hunched over a new parchment. She told me something, he says softly, not looking up. A name. For her. He nods. She says she had one. We just forgot it. You don't ask what it is. Not yet. Instead, you sit beside him as the sky begins to pale, watching his ink flow in slow loops across the page. The moon is gone again, but only for the day. She always comes back. Morning drips slowly through the abbey's high windows, soft and pale, like old parchment tea-stained with sunlight. Ulfric is still at his desk, eyes rimmed red but glowing with satisfaction. He has filled 6 sheets of vellum with looping, spidery script. Diagrams. Lists. Moon phases. Possible nicknames. You peer over his shoulder. Are those moon recipes? Suggestions, he whispers, for her future communion meals. If she ever drops by. Mainstream historical fact, in some monastic traditions, elaborate symbolic meals were prepared during lunar festivals, even if the church didn't officially recognize them. These were usually quiet affairs, more poetic than pious, involving round loaves, soft cheeses, and sometimes silver-painted eggs. Their purpose? Scholars still debate whether it was devotion, playfulness, or just culinary boredom. Fringe tidbit: a 12th century recipe scroll from France contains an odd section titled Suppers for the Celestial Lady. It includes instructions for honey tarts shaped like crescents and a mysterious moon jelly that glows faintly in low light. Historians suspect crushed mica was involved. Also, probably not edible. Ulfric insists the moon deserves variety. Tonight's menu? Onion broth, a single poached pear, and a buttered oatcake shaped like regret. You ask what that shape looks like. He hands you a lumpy triangle. It's abstract, he says. You nod solemnly and eat it. After supper, the two of you walk the perimeter of the abbey, as you often do now. The moon's not up yet, but her promise is in the chill. Ulfric carries a bundle of dried lavender and a spoon, just in case she appears early. When the first sliver of her rises, bright and thin as a whispered secret, Ulfric kneels and whispers, "There you are." You don't say anything. But you stand beside him, shoulders just brushing. The wind is gentle. The night is clear. No scrolls drop. No bells ring. Just her, and the stars, and your own quiet breath. Ulfric eventually rises and dusts off his knees. She likes pear, he says. You walk in silence for a while before he speaks again. I think she's lonely. You glance at the sky. She seems so vast. So present. How can something that sees everything feel lonely? Ulfric shrugs. Maybe because she does see everything. And nobody ever looks back properly. He points upward. Except us. You both lie on the grass, backs cold and damp, eyes tracing stars until your vision fuzzes. You think she watches everyone, you ask. Ulfric hums. Yes. But she's picky. She watches only those who leave oatcakes. Historians still argue whether the moon had any official personification in monastic culture beyond the symbolic Virgin Mary parallels. But in the darker corners of the scriptorium, where monks doodled, mused, and scribbled secrets, there are hints of a more intimate lunar affection. Names like Silent Sister and Lady of Silver Rest show up more often than you'd expect. Later that night, Ulfric leaves a note beside the moon shrine. You may visit us any time. No appointment needed. Oatcakes always available. And beside it, a tiny wooden spoon, carved with the word, soon. You don't ask what he means. You just smile, and go to bed. Dawn comes fog thick and feather soft, muting the bells and muting the birds. You wake to find Ulfric in the garden, wrapped in 2 cloaks and whispering to a cabbage. She understands, he says, patting the cabbage gently. You decide not to ask. Instead, you sit on the low stone wall beside the herb patch and wait for Ulfric to finish his cabbage conference. When he joins you, he's holding something round and glinting. It's a polished silver disc, about the size of your palm. I made her a mirror, he says. In case she forgets what she looks like. Mainstream historical fact, medieval monks occasionally crafted devotional mirrors, not for vanity, but to symbolize spiritual reflection and divine light. Some even believed mirrors could catch glimpses of the divine, though others warned they might trap illusions. Fringe tidbit, in a dusty Bavarian text from the 1200s, there's a passing reference to a monk who buried a small mirror every new moon, hoping the moon's light would remember him and find its way back. His name, apparently, was Brother Emil, and his mirror was dug up 3 centuries later by a confused goat herder. Ulfric places the mirror on the shrine's ledge, adjusting its angle until it points directly at the sky. Now she can see herself. You wonder if this shrine will ever stop growing. It now features 2 polished stones labeled left foot and right foot. A string of dried apple slices. A scrap of parchment that reads, "Come by any time, bring your clouds." You suspect the abbot has noticed. But he hasn't stopped you. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he secretly likes it. That afternoon, Ulfric suggests organizing a moon procession. Just the 2 of you. In the cloister. Carrying spoons. You agree, because honestly, what else were you planning to do? You hum the moon chant as you walk in slow loops. Ulfric holds a sprig of rosemary like a scepter and nods to each stone column as if they're all distinguished guests. Then, without warning, he stops. Do you think she's real? He asks. You blink. You mean, the moon? No, I mean the she part. The person part. The Lady of Light and Tide. Or did we just make that up because we needed her to be more than a rock? You think for a while. Then you say, maybe she made us up. Ulfric grins, deeply pleased. Historians still argue whether the medieval tendency to personify celestial bodies, especially the moon, was a holdover from pre-Christian traditions or a coping mechanism for the overwhelming vastness of the cosmos. Either way, the emotional bond remains well documented, particularly in songs, letters, and the margins of half-forgotten calendars. That night, the moon is bright and full. You both sit in the chapel with the doors open wide, letting in her light like a guest who needs no knocking. Ulfric passes you a warm mug of something vaguely apple-scented. The silver mirror gleams. The candle flickers. And just before the candle dies, you see it. A small scroll. On your lap. You didn't feel it fall. You didn't hear it land. But there it is. It says, "She remembers your name now. Sleep well." You don't tell Ulfric. But you keep the scroll. You tuck it into your sleeve. And you let the moonlight pour over your face, soft and slow, like a lullaby that's been waiting centuries just for you. The final night of your moon watch arrives with no fanfare. No clouds, no winds, no omens scratched into bark or baked into loaves. Just silence. And her. She's nearly full again, pale and perfect, hovering just above the chapel's roof like she's eavesdropping. Ulfric finds you sitting beneath the bell tower, your cloak wrapped around your shoulders, your hand resting absently on the silver mirror now permanently installed in the garden niche. He doesn't say anything at first. Just sits beside you, knees creaking. You both look up. She hasn't misplaced us, he murmurs. Mainstream historical fact, full moons held practical significance in medieval Europe. They lit roads, inspired gatherings, and were used to time everything from plantings to penitence. Some abbeys even scheduled moonlight meditations, wherein monks could sit alone and contemplate under lunar glow, though these often blurred the line between spiritual practice and drowsy stargazing. Fringe tidbit, in a crumbling Irish folio, a scribe recounts a monk named Father Rua who claimed the moon once whispered him a riddle in Latin. He got it wrong and, allegedly, it rained for 8 days. His fellow monks never let him forget it, nicknaming him Cloudmouth. Ulfric leans back on his elbows, face upturned. I think she likes us, he says. She hasn't smote us, so that's a plus, you reply. The candle flickers between you. Ulfric pulls from his robe pocket something odd, a tiny clay medallion stamped with a lopsided moon face. He offers it to you. For when you miss her, he says. You turn it over. On the back, it's scratched, sooner than you think. You're about to speak when the bell rings, once. Neither of you touched it. No wind. No birds. Just that quiet, deliberate chime. Ulfric raises his eyebrows. She always did have a flair for exits. Historians still argue whether unexplained bell rings were divine intervention, coincidence, or the result of bored novices with too much wine and access to ropes. But even skeptical scholars admit, those moments got remembered. Written down. Told again and again. The moon begins her slow descent. The night thickens. You both walk back toward your dormitory in companionable silence, the medallion warm in your hand. At your bedside, a final scroll. Not from Ulfric. Not from any hand you know. It simply reads. You watched me well. I see you now. You tuck it into your pocket. You're not sure whether to cry or laugh or both. But then Ulfric pokes his head in. Don't forget your spoon, he whispers. You hold it up. Never. Now, if your eyes haven't already started fluttering closed like medieval shutters in a midnight breeze, this is your cue to let go. You've wandered through a cloister of shadows and silver, followed a monk who couldn't quite keep the moon where she belonged, and somehow, without trying, you've come to care about a celestial body that may or may not have a sense of humor, a favorite biscuit, or a habit of writing tiny scrolls. As you settle deeper into your blankets, let the image linger, that soft round light hanging above an abbey garden, glinting off lavender sprigs and silver mirrors. No noise, no urgency. Just a silence so complete it feels like it wraps around you. Feel your breath match the rhythm of Ulfric's steps, slow and sure. Let your limbs grow heavy, like old stone warmed by centuries of prayers. And as your thoughts drift toward sleep, imagine a moon who remembers your name. Not because you're important. But because you noticed her. Because you looked up. Because sometimes, the quiet things notice back. So breathe. Sink. Forget the shape of clocks, the rules of calendars, the pressure to be anything but resting. Just you. The sky. A silver smile. And maybe, just maybe, a biscuit waiting in the corner of a dream.